Ancient temples were not built randomly. Long before the first stone was ever cut, someone decided exactly how wide the structure would be, how tall, how steep every angle would run. That decision is order, chosen on purpose, long before chaos ever got a vote. You can see it in the proportions. You can see it in the layout. Nothing about a structure built to outlast its builders happens by accident, and the people who built these ones knew it. Now, you've probably heard one popular explanation for that order. Ancient architects, the story goes, hid a secret perfect number in the stone. The golden ratio. It's a good story. It isn't the right one. The claim doesn't show up anywhere until the 1850s, more than 2,000 years after the building went up. And it only holds together if you're careful about exactly which lines you draw across the facade. So drop the secret number. The order was still there before the myth showed up. And it's still there now that the myth is gone, which leaves the real question. If it wasn't random, and it wasn't one secret code, what was the actual ordering principle? Look at the actual slope of an Egyptian pyramid, and you find something real. Egyptologists studying the surviving structures have found the slopes match simple ratios of whole numbers, chosen deliberately and controlled throughout construction. Not the golden ratio, not a coincidence, not decoration. A slope isn't something you back into by accident. Think about what holding that angle actually required. Every stone in that face has to match the same angle as every other stone for years, sometimes for decades. Across a workforce that turns over season to season, using tools that leave plenty of room for error. Some of these projects outlasted the ruler who commissioned them. That means the angle had to survive being handed from one generation of builders to the next, without drifting, without anyone deciding halfway through to wing it. You don't get that kind of consistency by luck. You get it because somebody set the number before the first block moved, wrote it down or passed it on precisely enough to enforce, and held the whole project to it. Nobody stumbles into that kind of discipline. It has to be chosen and rechosen. Every single day, the project continues. Later Egyptian mathematical texts confirm the broader pattern. A documented method for expressing a slope as a precise ratio existed in that tradition, exact enough to calculate and pass on to someone who wasn't there when the angle was first chosen. Whether or not the earliest pyramid builders used that exact method, the civilization built around treating a slope as something you calculate, not something you eyeball. That's one civilization in one place, choosing a proportion on purpose and defending that choice against every force that would have let it slide. Now travel somewhere that never had contact with Egypt. A tradition on the far side of that gap, with its own gods, its own builders, its own reasons for caring about proportion. There's a surviving architectural text from that tradition that states outright: a palace's length should follow a specific ratio to its width. Not a suggestion. A rule written down, meant to be followed by whoever built the next one. That's the detail worth sitting with. This isn't a shape someone noticed after the fact and admired. It's a standard recorded in advance, so a builder 2 generations later could follow the same ratio without ever meeting the person who first chose it. And this wasn't proportion for its own sake. In that tradition, the shape of a sacred or royal structure was meant to correspond to a cosmic order. The same principle showing up in the small building and the large one, in the human structure and the structure above it. The ratio wasn't decoration on top of belief. It was how the belief got built. No trade route connects these two traditions at the point this was written. Whatever they have in common, they didn't get it from each other. 2 civilizations, no contact with each other, different gods, different stone, different numbers entirely, but the same refusal. 2 examples. That might not feel like much. Maybe it's just 2 lucky coincidences, cherry-picked to make a point. Here's why that's the wrong way to hold this. A pyramid takes years and an entire economy's worth of labor. A palace takes a fortune and a workforce, and a ruler willing to spend both on getting the proportions right instead of merely finished. Nobody commits that kind of labor to a shape they haven't decided on in advance. The real question was never whether these buildings were planned. It's only ever how. And it's not only the monuments. Look past the temples and the palaces at the ordinary buildings people actually lived in across history, and you find the same discipline at a smaller scale. Consistent units, repeated modules, the same handful of ratios reused house after house, generation after generation, long before anyone wrote a word about sacred anything. One more honest objection. Maybe we only have the buildings precise enough to survive, and the sloppy ones just crumbled and vanished. So of course, what's left looks deliberate. Fair question. But that surviving architectural text isn't a building. It's an instruction written down before construction started, telling a future builder what ratio to use. An instruction like that doesn't survive by accident either. Someone thought the ratio mattered enough to write it down and pass it forward, whether or not any single building made from it happened to last. So the real test isn't, can I find 2 examples? It's, can I find one civilization, anywhere, that built something large by accident? Nobody has. Not once. Every serious look at a major structure finds a decision, not a shrug. That's not 2 coincidences stacked together. That's the same law showing up everywhere anyone actually bothered to check. 2 examples were never the claim. The claim is that deliberate choice is what building at scale actually requires. And everywhere we can check, that's exactly what we find. Neither of them is proof of a secret universal number. That was never the point. The point is what they both refused to do. Build without deciding first. And that's what makes the golden ratio story worth noticing. Not because it's true, but because of why it's spread. It feels true. It's elegant, it's mysterious. It flatters the ancients and flatters you a little for already knowing it. Believing it costs nothing. You've probably done this yourself, with other claims, in other places. Accepted the elegant version because checking the real one felt like unnecessary work. And nobody around you was checking either. Choosing a proportion, on the other hand, is a small, specific act of ownership. You decide the shape before the world decides it for you. If you don't choose the proportion, that doesn't mean no proportion gets chosen. It means something else chooses it for you. Whatever's easiest in the moment. Whatever the loudest voice in the room wants, whatever gravity and neglect do to anything left unattended long enough. Refusing to decide is still a decision. It's just one you didn't make on purpose. That's the same principle whether it's a pyramid slope or your own life. Either you set the structure or it gets set for you. It doesn't ask whether you find it interesting. It runs whether you're paying attention or not, the same way it ran under every stone in that pyramid, whether the workers on it that day understood the reasoning or simply followed the mark they'd been given. Actually choosing a proportion, building to it, and living with the consequences of that choice, that costs something. This is also why the myth was never really about ancient history. A story that lets you feel like you understand something, without costing you the work of actually deciding anything, is the same shape as every other way people give away their own judgment. You don't have to build a pyramid to hand over ownership of a choice. You just have to prefer the comfortable version of an answer to the demanding version of the same question. That's the difference between a law and a story about a law. Here's the part that isn't about ancient buildings at all. Every time you let comfort make a decision that structure should have made instead, you're doing the opposite of what these builders did. You're building without deciding first, and calling it flexibility. It rarely looks like a single collapse. It looks like a habit you meant to place somewhere and never did. a boundary you meant to hold and quietly let slide by the third time it was tested. A decision you keep outsourcing to whichever version of you happens to show up in the moment, instead of the version of you that actually thought it through in advance, back when you had the clarity to do it properly. This is how comfort addiction actually operates. Not as one dramatic collapse, but as learned helplessness in miniature, one unchosen proportion at a time, until the accumulated weight gets called bad luck or personality, or just how things went, and it compounds quietly. Because outsourcing one decision makes the next one easier to outsource too. The muscle that would have held the boundary, protected the block, chosen the hour, gets a little weaker every time you let the moment decide instead of you. That's not a character flaw. That's the same mechanism running in reverse. A proportion abandoned instead of chosen, over and over until abandoning it feels like your personality instead of a pattern you built. You can see the same pattern in how comfortable it feels to keep saying, "I'll fix that eventually," about the exact same thing, week after week. Eventually never arrives on its own. It has to be scheduled, the same way a slope has to be set before the first stone moves. Otherwise, eventually is just another word for never, but it feels better to say. None of that fails all at once. It compounds quietly, one unaccounted for load at a time, until the day it looks sudden to everyone standing nearby, including you. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most of that isn't happening to you. You're doing it. Every arbitrary choice that never got corrected was a proportion you had the chance to set and didn't. So here's where this stops being about buildings. If you sketched your own week the way you'd sketch a floor plan, how much of it was actually decided in advance, and how much of it just happened to you? Not a metaphor you nod along to and forget by the next segment. An actual floor plan, with actual load-bearing points, the same way the buildings you just watched had them. A work block nobody protected, that anyone or anything can walk straight into. A sleep schedule that drifts by the hour depending on the day, never actually set to anything. A stretch of attention you hand over to whatever's loudest in the moment, instead of deciding in advance what's actually allowed to have it. None of those are small. Each one is a proportion nobody chose, quietly holding weight it was never designed to hold. Add them up, and what looks like a chaotic week isn't actually chaos. It's just several small, unmade decisions, stacked in the same direction, long enough to look like a personality trait instead of what it actually is. Unfinished business. A building with no deliberate proportion doesn't stay standing because nobody's watching. It fails slowly, in ways that look sudden right up until they aren't. The same is true of a week, a habit, a life built without ever choosing the ratio on purpose. You don't need all 7 days fixed this week. You need one. Pick a single part of your schedule that's currently arbitrary, the one you'd have named first if you were honest a moment ago. Notice it. Name what it's actually costing you. If it's your sleep, that might mean choosing an actual floor and ceiling for it, and holding both for 7 days. No exceptions made in the moment. If it's your attention, it might mean naming 1 hour a day where your phone doesn't get a vote, and defending that hour the way a mason defends an angle. If it's a boundary you keep letting slide, it might mean deciding in advance exactly what you'll say the next time it's tested. So the version of you that answers isn't the version deciding for the first time under pressure. Whichever one you pick, the point isn't the specific choice. It's that you made it in advance, on purpose. The way every builder in this video already did. That's the law. It doesn't require your belief. It only asks whether you're going to keep building by accident. You just watched builders choose order on purpose, stone by stone, thousands of years apart. But choosing isn't the only place a law like this shows up. Sometimes the choice gets made for you in under a second, and you never even notice you agreed to it. There's a reflex running in your life right now that works exactly like that one. Once you see it, you'll catch yourself doing it by tonight.